Hallo und herzlich
Hello
willkommen.
and
Zukunft des
welcome.
Einzelhandels.
The
Trends, die
future
den
of
Handel prägen
retail,
werden. An
trends that
meiner
will
Seite
shape
Achim
retail.
Himmelreich.
Our speaker
Capgemini
is
Deutschland
Achim
GmbH
Himmelreich,
aus
Capgemini
Berlin
Germany
blickt auf
GmbH
eine
from
mehr als
Berlin.
20-jährige
He has more
Beraterkarriere
than
zurück.
20 years of
Schwerpunkt
experience
seiner
as a
Tätigkeit
consultant.
ist
He
Digitalstrategie
focuses on
und
digital
digitale
strategy and
Transformation. Ich
digital
bin sehr gespannt,
transformation in
was er
his
uns zu
work.
berichten hat.
I'm
Oliver,
really
viel
looking
Spaß.
forward to his presentation. Mr. Himmelreich, over to you. Thank you for the invitation and introduction. I am responsible for what we call customer experience and customer engagement in Germany for consumer goods and retail. And of course, we always have to look to the future to the extent it's possible. And we didn't just look into a crystal ball, but this is something that we just got fresh from the press. We got a study which was prepared by the Capgemini Research Institute, which we published, and where we are looking at what consumers are doing, their behavior, what's happening there. So this is what I'm going to present you, the basis for this study and its methodology. So we find that the consumer, we want to go back to the stores, but e-commerce is going to stay strong. Then delivery to your home has become more important. Nobody's surprised about this after our experience in the pandemic. And shoppers and consumers, and that's going to be key, a key point of my presentation, they are happier or more satisfied to order directly from brands, happier than in the past. And naturally, as a result of the pandemic, the trend towards healthy and sustainability or sustainable living has increased. And our conclusion from all of this is that we have to look at what it means for the brands or the retailers and consumer companies. What are the conclusions? What do they need to change? How to implement it in their strategy? Now, this is a study which I think the day before yesterday we published it. And what did we do? What was the purpose of the study? Of course, we want to know what's going on in the world of the consumers. What are the trends? And what happened during the pandemic? And in particular, with the leading or key research questions, we wanted to find out what is particularly important to consumers. What are the services consumers want to find in retail, in e-commerce? What are the trends as far as delivery and pickup is concerned? Omnichannel trends, what are most important here? And then, of course, sustainability and health. It's not a secret. These were the key questions in our research. It was an international study. More than 1,000 people were surveyed in 10 important countries, Germany one of them. And basically, we are covering all of the developed countries. And these are, in fact, the main countries of our operations, our work as Capgemini. For the other criteria, we try to have a representative survey representing our population, and we were largely successful here. On the right-hand side, you can see Germany, the coverage by age. This shows more or less, or it's more or less reflective of our age pyramid in Germany. You can see Gen Z, the very young age bracket. Now, 7% numerically, it's the smallest group, but they are particularly important because trends usually develop in the youth segment. And well, actually, in the development of generations, there is an interesting change, a kind of disruption. And that's something that we did not see with the previous transitions between generations. So they are, in fact, kind of a trendsetter. Then if you look at the locations, here you can see the breakdown according to large city urban area and rural areas, suburban areas, the structure in Germany. And on the right-hand side, you can see the employment status of consumers, what kind of work schedule, whether we have retired people, whether they are full-time employed or students. So that's employment status. Then the next one is according to educational attainment and household income. And this is reflective of the structure we have in Germany. When you look at income, you can see that in the largest group, this is the median income of German citizens. Now, the first category of our evaluation. Consumers are happy to go back to the stores, to the physical stores, but e-commerce is here to stay. It sounds like a contradiction, but we're going to resolve this contradiction later on. It leads to a challenge, homework that brands and retailers have to do. And we can see it here. Now, before the pandemic, people went to the stores, and during the pandemic, naturally, this was reduced. People didn't go to the stores. And then when the stores opened again, people were enthusiastic. I think everybody can understand it. Finally, we're allowed to go out again and socialize again and meet people again. And then the expectation is post-pandemic, when the pandemic is over, and that's what what all of us hope, that the value should be slightly higher than before. And of course, we will see that it might then settle at more or less the same level as before, but that's what people expect. People want to go back to the physical stores. That's an important insight. People will want to go back to the stores, but the online shopping preference will more or less remain the same. Sounds like a contradiction. People want to go out to the stores again. We are social animals, social beings. We want to meet other people, and that's why we're happy to go to a physical store. But during the pandemic, we realized just how convenient e-commerce is. Some people for the first time used e-commerce facilities, particularly senior citizens, because they didn't have a choice. And they found out it works quite well. It's so convenient. You never have to stand in a queue. You never have to line up in front of a shop. And others who ordered specific products in e-commerce now extended the range of products they ordered from e-commerce. They found out that, for instance, grocery or food, the last category that was sold online, was also ordered via the internet. So we have both trends. People want to go back to the physical stores, but they want to continue to use e-commerce because it works so well. And if you bring all of this together, then we come to the buzzword that we've had for 10 years, omnichannel, much quoted, much described, hardly ever perfect or not perfect at all in terms of its implementation, as far as I know, that omnichannel is in fact what all of us need to do. It's imperative that all of us look at omnichannel options now. Now, if you look at what people expect in the future, additionally, is you should be get it delivered to your home. You should be able to pick it up in a packing station or curbside at the retailer. And in the store, you also want to find the products that you know from online commerce. In online commerce, you get a personal recommendation. They know you because of your shopping history or other data. You don't have to stand in line. There are no opening hours in e-commerce. This is what the consumer now knows. And consumers want consistent experiences. So when they switch channels, then what works or what is possible in one channel should also be offered in the other channel. Of course, reality is completely different from this. But if you take a look at the concrete results now at the top, one thing is consistent across all data. Namely, Germany is not so different from the others, but the percentages are always slightly lower than the global average, which is not a surprise, because when you follow the development, you know that Germany is not a digital first mover, but what happens in Northern Europe and in Asia, it happens in Germany eventually, but with a time lag of some years. But the structure is the same. So anything relating to delivery is even more important as of now than the additional features that should be established in the store. And why is this the case? Or what is the underlying structure here? Now, on the one hand, these are people with children in their households, which is quite understandable that when you have children in your household, that you don't have so much time available, and logistics is quite a challenge for you. And we can also see the breakdown according to generations. The young generations, millennials and Gen Z, are quite obvious here. And one underlying pattern is it depends on where you live. So anything which is more innovative and digital will be first adopted or asked for in the cities, then it goes to the suburban areas, and from there it then is rolled out to the rural areas. Now the question is, of course, for the providers, are customers willing to pay for fast delivery? And in fact, for 2-hour delivery, are people actually ready to pay a premium? And it's 3.4% more. But if you then break it down, who is ready to pay more for fast delivery? In the middle, again, it's people with children, which is quite understandable. But what is even more important is the premium readiness or willingness to pay a premium for young people, where a person who is not as young as I am, it's because everybody wants to be satisfied immediately. Whenever you want something, you need the kick immediately, which might be true because with social media and when you grow up with cell phones, then you want this instant gratification. That's what you're looking for. But they are willing to spend more. And for young people who should have more time on their hands, it's even higher than with people who have children in the household. And to me, this is basically, I mean, you always wait for the results of such a study, and sometimes your assumptions are confirmed by the study, and sometimes you get a surprise. And here, it was not really a surprise, but the magnitude was a certain surprise to me and some of my colleagues, that we actually have quite a shift here. Increasingly, people want to buy directly from a company. They don't want to use retail, but it's D2C, as we call it. Now, people are not just happy with it. No, there's actually a trend towards it. Almost half of the consumers worldwide actually ordered directly from a brand. In Germany, slightly less, as I said before, because we always have this time lag for every trend. We always adopt the trend slightly later. But they've done this already. They have ordered directly from a brand. And who did it? More people who live in the cities, and the tendency is strong among young people and people with a high level of education. So why do people want to do that? Why do they want to buy directly from a brand? Is it simply because it's possible, because the brands have online shops, or is there more to it? And if you take a look at this, there's more to it. Now, the consumers say they get a better experience when they buy directly from the brand or order directly from the brand. Experience is becoming increasingly important, not just for the shopping transaction, but they want to experience the world of the product. That's different for games than for grocery, but it's not just that you purchase something, there's more to it. And they want to have access to the customer loyalty, customer retention programs, also important. One has the feeling that the brand understands you better than the retailer. So brand involvement is important. You want to interact with the brand. You want to build up a kind of relationship with the brand. And the brand understands you better. It has a better understanding of your needs. And with subscriptions, with subscription models, they can be more successfully concluded with a brand than with a retailer. And I want to be part of the social media community which forms around a brand. And this is particularly true for all products that are in any way related to lifestyle, be it fashion, or it could also be the case of games, because they are associated with a certain lifestyle. So the level of interaction with the brand is higher, and the brands can then, of course, more easily meet this expectation when they set up their own shop, because they have everything under control, and they also have control of the data, and this is what the consumers then prefer. So that's the kind of movement that we saw over the past few years. Many brands have gone in this direction, but actually we think that all of this is still at the very beginning, in its infancy. And we can see two examples here in the text on the right-hand side. Let's start at the bottom. Unilever, multinational corporation, you all know it, and in particular Unilever Hindustan in India. For the beauty brands, it's gone to great efforts. They installed direct D2C platforms, and it was a huge success. For instance, Lakme, they rely a lot on modern channels such as Instagram, and beauty by its very nature is something that people see as a lifestyle product and where you can communicate on social media very well. And Instagram is a channel which is very much real-time, visual. So that was, in fact, the most important communication platform in India for this beauty brand. Unilever's or Unilever Hindustan's beauty brand, and it worked very well. Even with a trivial product such as chocolate drops or whatever you call them, M&M candy, with such a trivial product, it was possible to build a powerful own shop. If you had told me that for any kind of chocolate bar 10 years ago, that they set up their own dedicated shop, that your Mars bar or Snickers or whatever those bars are called, that you buy them from such a brand, I would never have believed it because it costs millions to invest in it, but with M&Ms, and I took a look at it. Now, M&Ms in the different colors that we all know, but these are certain personalities, a young woman, an older gentleman, depending on the color of this chocolate candy. And we also have a diversity. They have a diversity edition to have an up-to-date offering, and people got very much involved with M&Ms and with the shop that was built up. They not only ordered the M&M candy from there, but you were able to design your own M&Ms. There were exchange platforms. So basically, M&M became established as a lifestyle brand, and it only works when you have a D2C model, so that people buy online from you. And in London and in New York, there are flagship stores, M&M flagship stores. I went to one of them, or some of them, when I was still allowed to travel, and it was amazing how people got involved with the product and how they made their own, combinations or mixes. And there's a lot of merchandising around M&Ms. You take the yellow one, the blue one, they stand for different characters, and that was very interesting. And naturally, it's a huge opportunity for any brand to then get into contact with a consumer, very intensive contact, and basically this is how you create true loyalty, not the kind of loyalty that we know with a program where you just collect points, transactional loyalty, where you have to invest something. No, loyalty, meaning or the kind of loyalty that we know from our private everyday lives. So like, children's loyalty towards parents, or the loyalty to your spouse or partner. Of course, not as intensive as in a family, but true loyalty. That's what you can get if you, in a successful and good way, get into contact or engage with your consumers. And then, of course, comes the question about data. And, right, you won't be surprised that Germany is a bit more skeptical, but you have to distinguish those observations. And when we see here that there are various types of data, then you find that consumers have fewer problems, or hardly any problems, also in Germany, to share transaction data. So data on what you bought and the other people who bought it as well, what did they buy in addition. People don't have any problems with this, or fewer problems. And Germany has historically been a country which has been very skeptical in terms of data privacy. And we are more or less global average here, same level as global average as far as transaction data are concerned. Personal data, nobody likes to share personal data very much globally, and particularly not in Germany. And if you look at the bottom, and the breakdown according to generations, once again, you can see something which is really quite interesting. And it shows a major underlying development. You can see it's not the Gen Z, the youngest generation, that have the highest willingness to share data, but the second youngest bracket, the millennials. And many sociologists and economic psychologists in the area of consumer research had this assumption that basically it's an ongoing development. The new generation becomes more and more progressive all the time, but this doesn't seem to be entirely the case. Here you can see that Gen Z is a bit more skeptical once again. And if we now talk about this new generation, Gen Z, nobody knows how they're going to change once they turn 40, whether they're going to stay like this. But we know from, or we learned from previous generations that, of course, once people have founded a family, they are going to change, their behavior is going to change, but the basic set of values will remain. And we can see that for Gen Z, one area becomes even more progressive, and we are going to see this particularly for the last chapter, sustainability and health. This is the largest leap that we ever saw in a generation concerning this topic, but in other areas, like willingness to share data, also in terms of a means of payment, anything related to finances, there we have a phenomenon where a generation becomes more conservative. We have a new generation, which is a challenge for marketing specialists, which in parts of their life becomes a bit more conservative, while in other areas of their life they become not only more progressive, but made a progressive leap. So basically, it's squaring the circle which you have to, that's the challenge for a company or for the marketing specialists of a company. And here we have the marketplaces. Now, marketplaces are something which is generally accepted. Amazon with Amazon Marketplace was the forerunner, the pioneer here. This is generally accepted. So this is not just going in one direction, that people want to buy from brands. No, they also want to go back to the physical brick-and-mortar stores, and they also want to use marketplaces. And the emphasis is on global marketplaces here, and the much-quoted local marketplace that many of you and I also read about, this did not really take off. It's not as successful yet, but we can see a development in 3 dimensions. People want to go back to the physical stores. They want to have an experience. It should be a shopping experience. They want to find the products they know from online shopping. Online is here to stay. They want to order directly from brands because they can interact with the brands. They trust the brands. They can build up a relationship with the brand. But nevertheless, they also want to order from marketplaces, logically because it's a wide range of products. The delivery is fast. So it's a multi-dimensional level of demands and expectations among consumers, which is easy to understand. But responding to this is, of course, a challenge. As was announced a couple of times before, priorities focus on health, sustainable living, and these priorities, that's the shift. Consumers have now shifted towards these priorities. And is this also reflected in their shopping behavior? And here we can say that we do have a sustainable or long-term change here because, quite honestly, we've been discussing sustainability for decades, and we as consumers, we have to be self-critical here. And we have to say that most of us talked a lot about it, and we came up with lots of claims, but in our everyday lives and consumption behavior, we didn't change as much. So we didn't walk the talk. And this obviously came to an end because the consciousness or awareness in terms of health and sustainability has become more intensive, and this is now also reflected in consumer behavior. And the first point, most important priority is health, personal health. The COVID pandemic actually accelerated this trend, and well, in China, in a study, they found this out quite early because then the sales of fish and vegetables went up tremendously immediately afterwards, and there were psychological in-depth interviews which made it clear that logically at that time they didn't have a vaccination, they didn't have any medication, so people were waiting for it. Now we have it, but we all know that if something doesn't work, doesn't function, our own immune system is the last line of defense, and you can only boost your own immune system with a healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, and anything related to it. And then, second most important, shoppers also have this awareness that sustainability means you protect natural resources. And all in all, and that's the third point, but all at a similarly high level, shoppers also want to make sure that with their purchasing decision, they also support sustainable production. Now the question is, are consumers willing to pay a premium for sustainability? Often enough, we read it in the headlines, sustainability, yes, but then nevertheless people go to a discount store. So how does it all fit together? And here for the young generation, Gen Z, the light blue bar is always quite prominent. They actually do show a willingness, at least now, at this moment, to pay more, to pay a premium. And what's most important is that these are organic products. Anything artificial should disappear from the shelves. And the second most important thing, when you buy a product, you have to be able to see whether it's sustainable or not. So transparent information is key. Information about the supply chain, the origin of the product, where does it come from? You have to be able to answer these questions to satisfy these needs. But you can only answer these questions if you have full control of your supply chain, if you know at any point in time where your products come from, and this must be understandable and credible, and you also need sustainable packaging. So people are aware of the impact of plastic waste and they want to avoid it. And now comes the big but, because they are willing to pay a premium, but in the middle, or at least in the long term, people are not ready to pay more. Consumers would expect, and that's quite a challenge, In future, they want to have sustainable, healthy products, but the price level shouldn't change, shouldn't be priced higher. And again, this is the task of squaring the circle for a producer. You have to be able to achieve this without increasing costs. Of course, naturally there will be shifts in the cost structure, but the price level should remain constant. And that's something which is not so easy to achieve. But at the end of the day, it's not impossible. And the way consumers view companies have changed. If you had conducted such a survey 20 years ago, what is the purpose of the company? They should produce their goods at the highest possible quality and lowest possible price. But now, and this has been accelerated by the pandemic, the way people see companies is different. They are not just economic enterprises, but they are social citizens, and this leads to CSR, corporate social responsibility, becoming a major factor today. So companies are part of our society. And with whatever they do, they should not just focus on producing products which are in demand, but they have to return something to society, and they have to do something that's positive for society. And particularly during a pandemic, which is an emergency situation, a crisis, which hits particular groups in our population particularly hard. And there the expectation is that companies also understand themselves to be as part of the solution to the problem and should act accordingly. Now the question is, so what do we do with all of these insights? What can companies, producers and retailers actually do? Based upon this study, there are a couple of 4 abstract guidelines. First of all, data. If you want to understand your consumer, and based upon this you want to offer the right products and services, you have to know your customer. And you don't know your customer, or you cannot get knowledge on your customer by sending a consultant to the customer's home. No, you have to collect data concerning your customer in a transparent and trustworthy way, so that we develop the base for understanding your customer. And then the channels. As I showed to you, consumers want to be able to do everything everywhere. They don't have just one preference. They want to be able to do the same thing everywhere in many different ways. They want to have delivery. They want to have the digital gimmicks they know from online trading, and they want to see exactly these gimmicks in the store. So omnichannel, that's the buzzword, which has been around for decades, but now the time has come to finally go in this direction and develop it. Then delivery and fulfillment has become particularly important, in particular for young people, people with children and people living in cities, where the last mile problems, that's not easy to find a cost-effective solution and an ecological solution to this. This is definitely not trivial, but it's a task which is actually a must for the producers and retailers now. And then, and that's the last chapter, the pricing of sustainable products should be set or should be designed in such a way that it's not too expensive. So sustainable, healthy products at the prices that we have today should be offered at a price which is not significantly higher. This cannot be achieved overnight. So what the study says is you have to start developing something that helps you do that right now. So when we sum up all of this. So I'm going to do a thought experiment, because based upon all of the insights we gained during our survey, we see that we are in a phase of transition. There was an old legacy model of trading which is now expiring, it's coming to its end. Something new is emerging, triggered by internet and e-commerce. We've known it for many decades, and this is now about cross-channel, omni-channel, and many of these other buzzwords in this respect. So what does the new world look like? And sometimes a thought experiment helps. And here, imagine what would happen if an advanced alien race were to visit us, and these would not be the bad, evil aliens that attack us like in movies such as Independence Day, but they are researchers, and they look at the world of trading and consumer products on our planet, among Earthlings. And what would the researchers, alien researchers, find? There's a hybrid model, online and offline, and both are used in parallel. There are a couple of restrictions. Often you cannot do offline what you can do online. The next story. The manufacturers only have superficial knowledge of their end customers. Well, this goes through retailers. They don't have direct contact. So how to know customers and how do they take their decisions based upon experience, heuristically as it's called. And this transition to a true data and customer-centric development has only just begun. Some have made progress here, but actually it's just begun. And decisions are usually made on the basis of products or marketing-oriented, and these are purchasing and sales are the most important parts of a company. It's a push model. You produce a product and then you hope you can sell it, but it should be the other way around. It should be market-driven, a market-driven development. So you know exactly what your consumers want. And only then, once you know what the consumer wants, will you start developing your products and services. So all of this needs to be turned around, which is a Herculean task. And then online, the online players, online pure players, were the one who got all of this off the ground, and they started this whole development, and they are not marketing or purchasing-driven companies, but they are, well, consumer or data-centric. And some companies have made more progress. They are the thought leaders, the pioneers, and that's what the alien researchers would see. But we don't know what they would say for the outlook, what it would look like in 10 years. So to close it in 2020, we didn't know that the pandemic would start, but in 2020 we Capgemini, we went to Shoreditch, which is a nice part of the city. There's this corner shop with all of the gimmicks, and we wanted to see how real-life consumers respond to this. We did it virtually. We had a couple of virtual tours with companies, and fortunately, in a couple of weeks, it can finally be opened because in the UK, they're going to ease the restrictions. This is the corner shop in London, and we have learning experience in this shop. It's an experimental place. So together with customers, we present new use cases all the time. We try out new things. So to conclude my presentation, I give you 50 seconds to watch it. It's not virtually open very soon, but it will be physically open soon. And I would like to invite you to visit the corner shop when you're in London or to book a virtual tour. Contact me. I'm Achim Himmelreich, achim.himmelreich@capgemini.com, or you find me in LinkedIn. So contact me and I can send you the link to the study. We have many more insights and evaluations than the ones I showed you. It can be downloaded free of charge. So I would be happy to stay in touch with you so that together we can sharpen our glance into the crystal ball. Thank you very much, Mr. Himmelreich. And it was a very special presentation. We learned quite a lot. And I would definitely like to visit this shop. And we already have a question for you. You already gave them your email address, and I'm sure you're going to get lots of questions later on. But I have one question already. So what would you recommend to the retailers when customers in future prefer to buy directly from the manufacturer in future? How can you counteract it? How can you transfer this to the retailers? From Hannah Pfaffen. Thank you, Hannah. That's a very smart and a very tricky question, because we've always had these conflicts between the manufacturer and retailers in both directions. The retailers have retail brands and manufacturers have their own channels. And in future, all of this can exist in parallel. Both can coexist. And the key question here is retailers must really evaluate contacts they have with their consumers. So if retailers get contact details or data because of their daily contact with the customer, then they have a certain leading edge. That's a competitive edge, and this can be offered to the brands, and the brands would not be able to resist this temptation. They would want to cooperate with the retailers, because they would realize that retailers know so much more about these customers. They have to cooperate. So it could be a cooperative solution. Thank you very much, Mr. Himmelreich. I think the question, or I believe that the question has been answered. So I wish you a nice rest of the day. Stay healthy and stay tuned. We'll be back here in just a few moments. Thank you, Mr. Himmelreich.